Hello, everyone. Santier here, and today I wanted to talk about Metroid Dread. Of course, there will be spoilers in a discussion about Metroid Dread, a review, as it were. I'm also going to talk about Metroid Fusion, so there's going to be spoilers for that game. There's a couple of reasons for this. The first is that there's quite a few similarities between Metroid Fusion and Metroid Dread, particularly in some themes of linearity of exploration and things like that. But the other big one is that Metroid Fusion is the first 2D Metroid game that I played, which means that it serves as a bit of a mental anchor for me. So it's kind of that serves as the baseline of what I expect from a 2D Metroid experience. Ergo, uh, other Metroid games are going to be compared to that, even though other ones may have come out first. For example, I tried playing Super Metroid on like a virtual console a while back, and I just couldn't. I had problems with playing it because I liked Fusion's control scheme better, and I couldn't quite like Metroid. Super Metroid just felt kind of clunky in comparison. So overall, I enjoyed Metroid Dread. I particularly enjoyed the way Samus moves and plays. I think she plays very well overall in the game. I did feel like there was maybe a few too many like button toggle things going on, which left me sometimes having to try to remember what thing did what. So there's a little bit of sloppiness there. They do have a lot of controls though, and I kind of like them doing toggles rather than having to like push some other button to cycle between available things. I think toggle buttons is a little bit cleaner. Maybe having some sort of like on-screen thing to just remind you what buttons do what would be helpful, or at least an option for that. But overall, I think Samus moves fairly well, and is enjoyable to play and control, which is a huge positive for the game. That said, something that has generally been annoying for me is the way Speed Booster is triggered. In Metroid Fusion, again, remember, Metroid Fusion is my anchor, it's my baseline. Uh, Speed Booster activates just when you move long enough. It's just always on. So you just move long enough and it kicks on into gear and starts going. You don't have to push some sort of separate button for it. And that was a problem I had with both Super Metroid when I tried playing it, and because you have to hold down a run button, and I'm like, you want me to hold down a run button and charge my blaster at the same time? Great. I, as an aside, I've never liked the charge beam particularly outside of Metroid Prime. Um, just because it feels like it adds some clunkiness to the way that things play when you have to hold down that button, the button for the charge beam, and do other actions. Having to hold multiple face buttons at the same time can be quite clunky, I feel. But that's kind of a slightly separate issue. And likewise, in Metroid Dread, you have to push in the left thumbstick to trigger the speed booster, which meant that I had a tendency to kind of forget about it a little bit. I might as well touch on this now. There's a couple of things that I didn't like about the game, and a big one was the speed booster puzzles. I'm not quite sure. My looky thinky's place is over there in the corner, so I tend to look towards it. I'm not quite sure because I don't object to the idea in principle. It's more the execution, and there's a couple of reasons for this. One big one is that it's just never communicated in the game that I recall seeing the changes that they'd made to Speed Booster compared to previous titles. So, for example, what sort of jumping you can maintain it through, that you can Shine Spark in multiple directions. Shine Spark actually, once you understand how it works in the game, it works like it's easier to perform than in previous titles, because you just like hold down the I'm activating it and then you push a direction. That works a lot better than trying to like push a direction and the button at the same time or whatever. I don't know. I remember it feeling kind of clunky to use in previous games that I've played. But it definitely felt a bit cleaner to use. Being able to use it in morph ball form was not communicated to me. Now, I made a lot of assumptions that you couldn't do certain things with it, but those assumptions are based upon how it's worked in previous titles. So I think there's a little bit of an excuse there for kind of, a series veteran such as I am, kind of anticipating it working a certain way. And when it doesn't, like when it's an expanded functionality, that took me off guard, and I wasn't expecting that to the point that I actually thought that there was another upgrade that I needed to get that would allow me to be able to like do some sort of instant shine spark or something to bust through speed boost blocks that for those puzzles. So much so was I of this belief that I thought Ravenbeak, like protected or had after him, would have the upgrade. So I actually accidentally beat the game before trying to go and collect a bunch of power ups because I assumed I needed another upgrade. Like I in a series that is known for like let us sprinkle stuff around that you're going to find upgrades for. You can't do it just yet, but once you find the right thing, especially when there's like, oh, this bomb puzzle requires you to get cross bombs or something like that to be able to get multiple bombs. It's like you expect some amount of upgrades like that expand an existing functionality. So when those sorts of things exist, I think it's pretty natural to say, well, I can see there being some sort of upgrade to the speed booster that would let me get through these blocks. I can't get through them normally, I thought, because I didn't know about the expanded like functionality with it. So I thought, well, progress is maybe behind this boss, and this is the only boss that I have access to right now that I can see. So I'll just fight this fight, and then it's like, oh, whoop, that actually was blocking the end of the game. So that was kind of a, I'm not sure if frustrating is quite the right word, but that's how that section kind of played out for me, where I was just like so convinced on that front. And I don't know, I have very mixed feelings still. I feel like a lot of the stuff that you can do with the speed boosters is not super well communicated, and I feel that I don't know, I don't quite like that level of dexterity puzzle in Metroid games. But I don't begrudge it being there, but I also kind of am annoyed that it's blocking me from being able to get 100% items, and I cannot think of a good compromise. Because either you have those things block actually useful upgrades and be worth the effort of like trying to get them, or you have them block two missiles, a two missile upgrade crate, which is individually pretty insubstantial. They only are worth anything in quantity. And so it's like there's not really a good balance point where it's like, okay, congratulations, you did this hard thing, you get nothing, woo! Like that's not great. But also when it feels like, oh, you want to get a maximum health. Basically, I think like if they were all like, I don't know, because again, like the missile packs kind of lose a bit of value. So like health is more useful, but then it's like if you're a player that's struggling with the game and more health would be good, more maximum health would be good for you for like making the game easier. Putting it behind a dexterity puzzle is probably making it more outside of your reach, like an executional puzzle like that. It's probably kind of putting it outside of your reach a little bit. So it's not like Metroid fundamentally lacks some sort of like system that lets those be like proportionately rewarding to the challenge of doing them without making it feel like you're punishing the player for not being able to do them, if that makes sense. So I don't know, I'm torn. Part of me feels like having them be some sort of navigational aid or something that would like, okay, congratulations, you've got the speed booster. This now allows you to do sequence breaks if you can perform these like speed booster tricks. Something like that feels like a better reward, maybe, but I'm not sure. That one's a real tough nut to crack. I personally am kind of negative towards them, but I can also see where maybe people really like having them, and I don't necessarily like. I don't want to take away things from a game that people enjoy just because I don't enjoy them. So I'm a very very torn position on the speed booster puzzles. The game overall, to jump back to Metroid Fusion comparisons, is very linear. What I found very interesting is that the linearity felt extremely transparent to me. Like it was like, oh yes, there's a golden path, and I found myself not exploring for like upgrades or something. If I felt lost, I'm like, okay, where's the golden path? Where did they intend for me to go? Because I very much so felt the game designers hand-holding me and being like, okay, here's the path through the game, and you just follow this, and you just the game felt lacking in exploration, and there's this broader pacing issue that I felt with it, where I felt like the pace of like hitting boss encounters was too rapid. Now, I'll talk about bosses later. but I felt like there wasn't enough time spent exploring between boss fights, which is kind of an odd thing, but it's just kind of a weird pacing thing. And I think part of the reason for that is the sense of linearity of the game was extremely strong to me. Part of that's based upon the way that they box you in to try to make sure you can't get too lost, which I have mixed feelings about. Um, I don't think it's a bad idea, but I feel like it was a little heavy-handed. I think is the way a little too obvious, a little heavy-handed. This was like my experience with it, though. I could tell pretty quickly what they were doing. Now, Metroid Fusion is also extremely linear, um, but haven't felt it as much when I've played that game. Now, it's been a while since I have played it, so like the linearity is something. Because here's the thing, I first played Metroid Fusion like 20 years ago when it came out on the Game Boy Advance as a kid. You know, Metroid Fusion and Metroid Prime have come out. I was super excited about them, and that's when I first experienced Metroid Fusion. I played Metroid Dread, you know, as somebody who's been a game designer myself, an indie game designer, and thinking about game design and analyzing game design and all these sorts of things, like how do you guide players and all that sort of stuff, you know, for a while now. So I don't know how much that makes the guardrails and the linearity of Metroid Dread more obvious to me. I also saw some stuff about like some titles to videos and stuff before I like Game Maker Toolkit's video about how Metroid Dread keeps you from getting lost. I didn't watch it at the time, so I didn't have that sort of sense. But like there might have been a little bit of clues here and there. So all that to say, I don't know how much Metroid Fusion just was isn't as obvious that it's linear, like super linear in the way that it's like being sort of designed, or if compared to Metroid Dread, or if Metroid Dread was just way more obvious to me because of the position I'm at as a human being, to be able to like pick out that sort of detail. But it very much so felt like it's like, okay, here's the road you're supposed to follow in Metroid Dread, and is like, okay, there's like some side pit stops where I can maybe pick up some power ups, but it's like, this is the road I gotta follow, and it didn't feel like I had exploration alternatives. It felt like it's like, okay, you're at a boss fight, now you have to do this boss fight, you have to get through this boss fight, because that's the only way to make actual progress forward. It very, very, very strongly felt that way to me. And it's like, okay, I just gotta power up. I know I'm gonna run into a boss encounter soon. Or, you know, sometimes boss encounters had a weird relationship to power ups. Now, I do feel that the bosses were sort of interesting. I think, I don't know. I have mixed feelings on those, but I'm jumping ahead too far. The linearity of Metroid Fusion was not apparent to me until I replayed that game, and I think it just, I feel like it does stuff that makes that less obvious. A couple of things. It feels like Samus is more independent of the Adam character. Slightly different characters in both games, but she feels more independent of the Adam character going through the game. But also, one of the key things is, yeah, that level of independence feels like you're exploring a bit more. One of the other key things with Metroid Fusion is the way that they handled the map, because they had the like pink official map areas that you'd like uncover with the map room, but then they had those green off-grid map areas, which made it feel like you're sort of like breaking out of the intended space somehow. Like it was an incredibly linear experience that felt like you were having to find workarounds to like not being able to take the linear path. So they did a really good job, I felt, of like indicating the direct path and then having you go around it in Metroid Fusion. And so I don't know. I'd have to replay it to kind of have clearer thoughts on it. And this is not supposed to be a Metroid Fusion review. But what I'm trying to do is create a comparison here where both Metroid Fusion and Metroid Dread are very, very, very linear games. They pretend not to be, but they actually are. And I feel like Metroid Fusion did a better job of doing the smoke and mirrors and making it feel non-linear when it actually was. Whereas Metroid Dread, it very much so felt like there was a golden path, and I needed to follow that if I wanted to make any progress in the game. And it just, I felt very like that I had to follow that. So it's a big point for me because it felt like the game was lacking in exploration. and it felt lacking in like if I was feeling stuck in an area, it didn't feel like I had alternatives. It's like, well, this is the golden path. I have to get through this roadblock on this golden path because there's no other way to go. There's no other direction I could take. And I felt that very strongly. Which let's go ahead and move on to bosses now. Overall, the bosses were like Metroid Dread has a lot of really challenging parts. It does a really good job of checkpointing you before them, which takes some of the challenge isn't the right word because it doesn't remove challenge. It removes like tediousness and frustration when failing in those challenging parts. This is something that I appreciate that they did with both entering Emmy zones. Well, the Emmy's active, obviously, but entering Emmy zones and boss fights, as they did a really good job of checkpointing you. So that way, if you died there, you wouldn't just be like booted back to your last save. That was really good, and I'm really glad that they did that. I don't know. I boss fights were okay. I think that they were rewarding to beat, but I also felt like I had to get through them, and I often would be like, I'm having fun exploring the game. Oh no, it's another boss fight. So I felt like boss fights were coming up too often relative to exploration. Like I wanted the ratio to be weighted heavier towards exploration, and boss encounters to be less frequent feeling. And that could just be because I felt very like stuck on the golden path. I don't know. But they had some interesting boss fights. And overall I enjoyed them. But like I'm not somebody who plays games for boss fights. So to me that's not why I'm playing a game. Like even if I'm playing like a Dark Souls or something, I'm not playing it for boss fights. I'm playing it more for like the exploration and regular encounters. So that could probably part of be why I feel kind of like boss fights were fine. I think they were rewarding to overcome. Uh, but they also often felt like, okay, I have to get through this boss fight to get back to the exploration I enjoy. So it's a bit of a mixed bag in that regard, and a lot of that's very. I mean, this whole thing's subjective. So, um, other particular notes about it. I feel like that's. I don't know. It feels like this has been kind of brief, but um, yeah, I don't know. Definitely loading times between zones were a bit long, but that's definitely also like I trust that they did their best to kind of optimize that. I appreciated the teleportals all being able to connect to each other once you got far enough. Um, it helps with things a lot. Something else. This is just like a small thing. It's not particularly. I don't have particular opinions on it either way, but I found it very interesting that this game adds markers for tracking stuff and then has so many icons on the screen that there's not really a need for them. I found that rather amusing. I don't know. It's just like, oh, this is an odd little thing of like they added this tool, but also kind of made it pointless at the same time. But I appreciate that they gave good indicators on the map overall of where things are. Um, so yeah, overall, I think that's overall I enjoyed it. I wish that there had been a bit more of a feeling of exploration in the game. I wish more of the game had been weighted towards exploration rather than I don't know. It felt like I wish boss fights had been spaced out a little bit more. But they did a really good job with checkpointing. One final thing that I should say is I have very mixed feelings about the Emmys themselves. I don't like forced stealth sections particularly. Now I knew some amount about these coming into it, obviously. Checkpointing certainly makes it less bad. I do wish that you'd kind of keep the map when you die in an Emmy section because often the hard part is figuring out where you're trying to go. So part of why what I'm trying to figure out here is how to communicate sort of my thoughts. The Emmy sections. So I especially don't like stealth in games where any failure is like getting spotted is just instant failure. Metroid Dread doesn't quite do that. something like the Assassin's Creed games have areas like this where it's like, oh, you got spotted, congratulations, game over. You desync or whatever. There's some areas like that in some of the Assassin's Creed games, as I recall. I don't know why this is what I think of, but I think of the Hyrule Castle Garden area as Kid Link and Ocarina of Time, where you have to like stealth through there. And there's a couple of different stealth areas in some of those games where it's like, oh no, you got caught, instant failure. They work a little bit differently than just like hitting game over, but it's more or less like a similar sort of thing. I much prefer something like a lot of the Batman Arkham games or the Middle Earth Shadow of games. It's like, oh, you got spotted. I guess how you're approaching the game is now different. And a lot of the Assassin's Creed is like this, of like, oh, well, you lost stealth. Well, now you're in combat. Maybe you need to like break stealth and run away and hide or whatever. The Emmy sections were kind of in between those two sorts of things, so they weren't quite as bad as the like insta fail stealth sequences, because you could still try to like get away from the Emmys, but they weren't. It didn't quite full on feel like, oh no, I got caught. I guess I have to fight my way out of this now. Like it was somewhere in between. So I have like. I definitely would like the next Metroid game to not include those elements, but I think it was fine for what they're trying to do for this game. So I don't know. It's kind of another like mixed feelings area where it's like I don't quite like it, but it's not something I hate exactly. It's a type of gameplay that I'm not as fond of when it feels like, oh no, you failed your stealth check. I guess you're gonna lose now. And it felt a little bit, but not 100% quite like that. So I don't know. It's in a weird middle ground where I don't have simple feelings about it, is what it kind of comes down to. So overall, now that think I've gotten all the things. Overall, I did quite enjoy Metroid Dread. In particular, the strength of the gameplay, playing as Samus feels really good. I also liked the story overall. I think I miss some amount of, because in Metroid Fusion, there would be times when you'd go on elevators between sections of the space station that you're on, that Samus would basically monologue to herself, and something like that would have been nice to have. I appreciated it. I didn't quite fully grasp the idea that the Adam you're talking to in most of Metroid Dread is actually Ravenbeak impersonating Adam. That didn't click to me until other people were mentioning what was going on with that. I'm like, okay, yeah, you can see the clues here as well. Like, that's great. And I think that was actually, like, in retrospect and in context, I think that's pretty interesting. Exploring Samus's Metroid side after Fusion, I think, is also really interesting. I think I kind of like Fusion's story itself in terms of like what's being told and stuff a little bit better, but it's not that important. I overall enjoyed the Metroid Dread story as well. And I think it did a good job of being a sort of follow-up to this. I would say a good follow-up to Fusion's story. And did some interesting stuff with that. And I like the way Samus's character is portrayed just through like physical actions and stuff. I think that was really well done. I would like a Metroid game that like is maybe not always putting her in just completely desolate situations where everything is dying around her. I don't know. It would be nice if she had like some sort of contacts where, I don't know. This is going back, and this is a bit of a tangent, but I just want games that like involve like some exploration and going like in space, basically like the space version of Wind Waker, The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. I want something kind of like that, and I feel like Metroid and Star Fox are both Nintendo properties that could fit into that sort of game. And like Star Fox Adventures Dinosaur Planet, I'm getting on a massive tangent here, but Star Fox Adventures Dinosaur Planet is kind of more that direction to some extent. I feel like Metroid could kind of fit into that sort of framework, though, pretty well. And I would be happy to see something like that, where I'm like, okay, I can hop into Samus' ship and I can fly it to, like, around this area, and maybe she's doing some exploring in this particular area, but like there's maybe some friendly NPCs she can interact with that aren't going to be imminently dead. So anyway, uh, I feel like every time I'm like final thoughts is like another final thoughts. Okay, so story I overall liked. Controlling Samus felt really good. Exploration felt kind of weak. Boss battles were solid, but not like the part of the game I'm most like engaged with or desire. I don't know. That's not why I'm playing the game. Is not for boss fights. And I felt that boss encounters were a little too frequent. But overall, I enjoyed it. So those have been my thoughts. Curious to hear what your experiences were with the game. And until next time, everyone, take care and goodbye.